I want to introduce Peter. So, come on.
Hello everybody.
Hi,
My name
Peter.
is Peter Verhas. I work for IPM Switzerland for like 10 years. Before that, I was working for IPM Hungary and I relocated. And today I will talk about how to write documentation. I wouldn't say the easy way, but a little bit easier than we usually do. Okay.
Yes, and I want to introduce moderator. Hi, Alex. Nice
Hello,
dog.
colleagues. Yeah, hello, colleagues. We have here internal chat for the org team, and I was asked why shouldn't we engage people to join? So I suppose it's a good way of engaging people to join, just to take a look, just to let them look into our pets. So I see also here you have a fantastic cat. Peter, do you have some pet at home?
Yeah, I have a Doberman. I have a
Oh,
beagle,
Wow.
so 2 dogs, and I also
Wow.
have a cat.
yeah.
But for the sake of the presentation, I lock them out from my working room because if they are nagging me, then I cannot present really. Especially the cat always wants to come up to my lap, and then the cat swirling around here wouldn't help too much about focusing on some serious topic like documentation.
Yes, this
Yeah.
the topic very, very important. And Peter, what do you think? Why it's serious topic? Why we
Because
need to improve this?
because it's boring for most of the developers. And I'm a unique person in this sense because I like to write documentation, but it's my perversion. I'm different. I know that. But being different also was leading and guiding me towards that I wrote books. And that's an enormous amount of documentation and writing a lot of
Oh,
text uh, about Java projects. It was published by Pact. And also, I created a tool in the last 20, 28 years since I realized that documentation writing is boring. The tool I will talk about today was started in 1996. Actually, the very first version I created in Perl. Somebody may even remember that language. It doesn't really exist today. It still exists, but it's not really heavily used. And the version I will show today is a much more developed version, and it's written in Java, and it can be used to document Java project, but any other projects as well. Not only Java, it can be used for many other different things. I am going to renew my blogs, which I was not writing for a while, and I will use this tool to maintain the articles. I also use this tool not only for documentation, but also for as a templating tool for code generation in the Java GSI project, which is a Java code generation tool. And so I think it's serious because if you don't have a good documentation, then nobody will use your code unless they are very much forced, but then they will suffer. And you have to write the documentation. And then my opinion is that we should make it as easy as possible. And we should use all the technical tools that we have instead of wasting human resources.
agree, totally agree. So we can start. And one more highlight that Peter, you told that you wrote books, you're writing, you in blogs. So can we share your links, maybe in chat, on Discord, or on description?
Yes, of course. Yes. I will share it with you, and then okay, just a moment, and it's very easy.
Yeah, we can later share, so
Okay.
it will be
It's
available.
okay.
Okay, our colleagues who are watching us, I just want to remind you that you can write your comments, you can write your questions in comments under video on via community platform on Discord, and Alex will be able to read, and Peter, after this presentation, will answer. So watch attentively and write comments and questions. We are waiting. So, Peter, let's start. Thank you.
How much time do I have?
About 45, 15
40
minutes.
45, 50 minutes. That's great.
Yeah.
I love it. And I also see the clock. So, okay, let's start. So write the documentation and the document as a code. As we discussed before we started this presentation, that the second largest problem with the documentation is that the documents get outdated, and writing documents is really boring. And yes, this is the very first problem, that documents must be written. You cannot avoid that. It's like a fact of life, like tax and death and writing documentation. These are the certain things. And there is a movement in the community, and this is not my idea. It's a very wide, there are conferences all over the world about doc as a code. Write the docs.org. You can see there the definition of what is really docs as a code. And they promote that we should write documentation like if it was code, the same way. And it already kind of makes writing documentation a little bit easier for the developers. But I propose a little bit more tools to ease the writing of the documentation, or maybe not to ease the writing, but to ease the maintenance of the documentation. So at very first, I will talk a little bit about what is doc as code, what it really means. And only for those who have never heard about it, I won't go into the details. And afterwards, I will explain a little bit how it can be extended or amended and how we can use some extra tools for that. And then the major part of this presentation will be a hand-on demonstration of the tool. I will use it in front of you. I will edit a document, and then you will see how this document will come into form using this tool. So what is document as code? So first of all, documentation is originally a different aspect than writing code. And usually, because of that, it's a different discipline. It's a different trade. It's not done by developers. It's done by tech writers. And it needs a little bit different skills. Of course, there can be some developers who also have the tech writer skills. But generally, these are two almost distinct principles. But tech writers, even though they are not programmers, that still, it's in their names, they are tech writers. So they are technical people. They understand the technology. And they can use technical tools. And this is an enabler factor for document as a code, that technical tools can be used. So it's not just like that, oh, I cannot work with anything else, only Word documentation. There are people like that, but they are not tech writers. Tech writers can use different technical tools like Asciidoc or Git or markup languages and other things. When the software evolves and the new documentation has to be created for the new release, then the documentation also has to evolve. And the problem is that when there are problems in the document, then these have to be discovered. And many times we can only discover it only during review. So we don't have things like unit tests for the documentation, but it would be great to have things like unit tests and have continuous integration for the documents like we have for the unit test, for the code. And there is a big difference, is that the documentation is redundant by its nature. So many times when I have a code which is repeated at a lot of places in my code, then I say, okay, this code is used at many different places, almost the same. So I move it into a different method or different class or whatever, and at different other places, I am only referring to it and I'm invoking the code that I was refactoring. But when I have a documentation and I am documenting, let's say, configuration parameters, and by default, I set all the default value, all the Boolean configuration parameters to false by default. And then I have to document it. But it may not be really good for the reader to say that, just remember that all the Boolean configuration is false by default, because a reader may not read that chapter at the start. He is or she is interested in only this specific configuration and reads the documentation of the configuration here. So it has to be here that this configuration flag sets this and that. If it's true, it's this. If that's false, it's that. And by default, it's false. And if I change the default from false to true for whatever reason, I have to change it at every different location. I cannot do the same as I do, or can I? I will show actually the tool that with which you can do that. But in the documentation, you just cannot write that. And by the default value is, and turn to the page here and there, and it will be written there. Because just for the single value of by default is false, the user shouldn't be made to go there. It's a lot of work reading the documentation. That way is unreadable. So the documentation has to be redundant, because the reader who is reading it is redundant. It's like code inlining for the processor. When we are inlining a method, it will be copied into the machine code. And when we say don't repeat yourself as a principle, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't repeat yourself in the compiled machine code, in the binary. It can include repeated code. If that's the optimal, you should not repeat yourself in your source code. But then, if we have a source code for the documentation, we perhaps may do the same. And doc as code tries to eliminate these bugs, because it says that let's treat your documentation as a code. So what kind of bugs can we have? We can have language, grammar, and style bugs. And I cannot really help too much. There are tools for that, but these are something which are really difficult to automate, to fix. And there are problems with the consistency of the documentation. When the documentation is lagging behind the features of the system that we are documenting, or I'm changing some part of the documentation, but I'm not changing the other parts. And if I look at the previous example, I changed the default value for the Boolean configuration parameters from false to true, and I change it in the main chapter, saying that the default is true for all the parameters, and I forget to change it at some place, and then it says the default is false, and then which one is right then? They are contradicting to each other, and this is a documentation bug. So how can we address these issues? Well, language, grammar, and style, there are some personal productivity tools like Grammarly, which I like, and I use it. And there are some automated tools for checking. But the major thing is review and regime. So there should be a process how we are writing document, who is reviewing it, what checks should be done, who should approve the documentation, and things like that to reach a certain quality. Now we have the feature log. When there is a new feature and information in the source code that we are documenting, what we can do really here is that we fetch the information from the source code automatically. So actually, when I say that the default value is false, I don't write there false. I write there something that will trigger during the document compilation, and which creates the final documentation from the document source code, will somehow fetch the default value from the source code and write it there into the final documentation. So fetch everything from the source code, which is possible to fetch from the source code. The other possibility is to doc signal the documentation and the code and automate the update of the documentation, or at least make warnings and failures like unit tests for the documentation. So I can say that I can calculate the checksum of a file which implements a certain feature, and in the documentation where I am talking about this specific feature, I write some things there which will include the checksum of the file. And if this checksum is different, then the file has changed, and then my documentation is outdated. And the documentation compilation process will fail and give me an error to change this checksum and obviously update the documentation, because the checksum difference is only a signal that something has changed. If the feature changed, probably, not necessarily, but probably, the documentation of the feature should also be changed. And there is another possibility to avoid or minimize feature lag, is to move some part of the documentation into the source code. I do it many times. And again, my example is the configuration parameters. These configuration parameters are usually listed in the source code at one place, one after the other. If I insert a new configuration parameter, I modify the source code, and I am debugging it, and I am doing whatever. And then I forget that at somewhere, I don't know where, but somewhere in the documentation, there should be a place where I should document this new configuration parameter that I was inserting. Or I delete one, and then I have to delete it from there. And with this tool, what I can do is that I write a few lines about the configuration parameters, because this usually, the documentation for one single configuration parameter is not too long. So I have a few lines in comments, which is in the format of the documentation, which is usually Asciidoc. And the documentation automatically fetches this comment, removes the star characters, whatever in front of it, and inserts into the final document as the part of the documentation. And the third one, when the document becomes inconsistent, so at one place is different than at the other place, is that, well, I can define variables into the documentation, and I can use them, or I can define kind of methods, or let's say it's called macros in the documentation. And there are repeated text, then, well, in the documentation, we should have repeated text. There is copy-paste, but we shouldn't do it manually. We have to automate it. And the tool has to copy-paste for me from one place to every place where I am using it. So this good old doc as a code is the existing one, and the new approach that I am promoting, and I will give an example with a tool, is what can be done with this extra step forward towards doc as a code. So what is the tool? The tool is a very simple, in principle, very simple tool. It's called Jamal because it's written in Java, and it's Java macro language. 28 years ago, it was just another macro language, but that's not a good name because since then it evolved a lot, and it's a very specific and outstanding tool. And it does nothing else but it reads an input text, processes the macros which are in the input text, and creates an output text. So converts one file to another. Simple, is it? And where is the power in this? Well, actually, the power is not in the idea, but the power is in the implementation. That this macro language is implemented in Java, and it's integrated so with the JavaDoc. So you can use these macros in JavaDoc. You just have to configure in your Maven or Gradle project to use this Taglet and the Doclet, which uses the macro language. You can use it with the Java design with Java source. You can use inside Asciidoc. There is a plugin for that, and we will use this one for the demonstration because it's integrated into the IntelliJ. So whenever you edit something which is in Asciidoc, then you can immediately see the result with the macros evaluated on the right side. It's integrated into Maven, so you can use it as a Maven extension, and then you can use these macros in the POM files, and with that one, the POM files can be shrink very much, and they become very, very simple and small and much more readable than the huge XMLs. It's a matter of taste. I like it. And it's also, just for fun, was integrated into Word. So you can have a Word document, a docx format file, and then you can ask Jamal to process it. And every macro which is inside the text will be solved and processed, and then you will get a Word document which contains the processed files. And what kind of macros do we have? Well, we have a limited set of core macros. We will see that. We have a snippet library, which is very much aiming towards documentation. And we will look at a lot of examples of those. But in addition to that, there are other macro packages which can help you doing scripting. So you can have scripts inside your document and do some calculation while the document is processed. And for that, you can include Groovy, Ruby, JavaScript, Java, and, well, even BASIC. I didn't list it there because many years ago I wrote a BASIC interpreter in Java, and that's also integrated into that. It's also integrated with BluntUML. It can handle YAML files, XML files, fetching data from a YAML format or from XML. For the XML, we will see an example for that, because we will fetch the version and the artifact ID and the group ID from a POM XML into the document. So whenever the version changes, the document will also change automatically whenever it's compiled, and it will show the latest version that the documentation is about. So we won't forget to update the version of the document. And you can include BluntUML diagrams, and there is an IO package with which actually you can just start any external program, so you can integrate it with any external graphic creational tool or whatever. So let's do the demo. And for that, I have an IntelliJ project that you can see here. And don't worry, I will enlarge this part, because that's where we will work with this one. This project is not really interesting what it is. It's a source body. It can be used to compile Java source code, which is inside the Java source code during the runtime, and then load the resulted classes very easily. It's a functionality which is provided by the JVM for the runtime, Java runtime, but using these tools, actually, it gives a fluent API, so it's very easy to use these APIs with this tool. What I will look at is the documentation, and it's posted on GitHub, so it has a readme.adoc file, but I'm not editing the adoc file, I'm editing the adoc.jam file, which is the Jamal version. So it's extended with Jamal macros, and here you can already see some Jamal macros, which probably seem very cryptic right now. And but let's have a first look at the Asciidoc file, which is generated, and conventionally we are editing this Asciidoc file, and I will just copy this Asciidoc file here instead of the jam file, and if there is no macro, then it's just that it is. And I will cheat a little bit because it's in Git repository, so I can just insert the macros, just resolving the definitions, and then I can see where it is changing, and I can go that way backwards, inserting back all the macros and showing the things. But first of all, let's have a look at what the problem really is with this source code and documentation source code. One is that if I am looking at this code, it's okay, it's great. But if there is any change in the file, and then this has to be updated. And actually, this source code is coming from, if I'm looking at, let's say, where it is, it's actually coming from the test demo file. So if I look at here, then I have, oops. I have this, this code here. And it's denoted with this snippet callback compile. And these are the lines of the snippet. And instead of copying it all the time, I have to ask Jamal to copy it to me. So what I can say is, and I'm changing back, that this is a numbered sample, simple compile. And okay, but what is a numbered sample? It's not defined. Yes, because I also deleted the definition of numbered sample. And where is numbered sample? I will change it here. And oh yeah, it's here. Numbered sample is a listing of some source code where it says that it should number the lines with this format. And it should also trim the lines, because if you look at here, I have here a lot of spaces, and I do not want to have these spaces in the documentation, so it trims the lines. And then I am fetching the snippet with the snip macro, which is here, and the $x is the parameter of the numbered sample. It doesn't need to start with a dollar, it's just a convention. I can just write that, I can change it easily, and that now it becomes very simply $sign. But then if I change it, then it works again. And I fetch it, and then I also have a sample which is practically the same, except it doesn't number the lines. And every macro which is opened is also closing somewhere. Numbered sample is defined with the macro define, and then I can just simply say that here, simple compile. And simple compile is a snippet which is here in this file, not on that one. Sorry, that's the output in this file. And it's called callback compile, and it's a simple compile. That's a different one, sorry. Then simple compile is here. I shouldn't, yeah, of course. It's here. But the same thing is true for the other things. I just mixed up two different snippets. Every snippet has a name, and I can refer to them. And to save up some time and compilation, the snippets are collected. And so not all the files are read by the macro. It says that snip collect from this directory, and then all the files are read, and then all the snippets are collected. And also, if I look at that, source body is written like source and body, but if I am making a mistake and I'm typing them differently, then I have to pay attention that I'm typing it all the times all the same. But instead of that, I can just define that SB is source body, and wherever I'm using the macro SB with the macro start and macro ending, then it will write source body with the right typesetting, with the right capitalization. And I can use it at many different places. Now, the next thing is that we have here dependency parameters. And these dependency parameters, now it contains this version. And it also says source body, and the group ID is com.javax0 Jamal. And if I change any of these, then I have to change it in the documentation. But this is something which is in the XML file, so I can change it. And then I can just say that it comes from the POM file, and I have here an XPath. But the POM is a macro, actually, which is not defined. So again, if I look at here, I have errors at the start. Instead, what I can do is that I define this macro that I want to snip an XML. And this XML will be called POM, and this is the file name. And afterwards, I can use this POM as a user-defined macro, following with an XPath afterwards. And then here I have the group ID, the artifact ID, and the version ID. And if I am opening the POM file, and just for fun, let's say that I am changing it to from snapshot to final release, then it will automatically update the file and it will say it's a final release, even with the typo that in letter A is missing. Okay, now let's see what else do we have. Here we also have some source code. And then I can say that, okay, I want to have here a source code, which comes from the simple compile. But I am interested only in the line which contains the pattern, my class space one or more equals and so on. Because if we come to simple compile, let's have a look at the code, the snippet in the test demo. Simple compile, we are here. In the documentation, we were looking at this source code above here. And now we want to talk about the different lines of this source code. And therefore, we are having it here on this line. And then I am saying that from all the source code lines which are here, I just want to keep one. I kill all the lines, but I want to keep one which has the pattern, my class, and so on. And also I go on, and then I can also here use the snippet. About the Asciidoc, I can change here as well again and again. And then I here have a macro, which is a counter. Asciidoc doesn't really help me to number the chapters, but instead of that, I can number the chapters with Jamal. I can define a counter, which is also in the snippet handling macro library, and I can say that I have a counter which becomes a special macro because whenever I use it, it increases its value. And I say that the format should be the $D, which is very usual, coming from the standard C library for 40 years ago and still used in any other languages, a dot and a space. And then we just get here, get compiler object. I don't even need the space here because it's already in the format. And then I am numbering it. And the next time I'm using it here again, let's use it. If I am inserting a new chapter, like let's say I am inserting a new chapter, why not? And yep, I am here making something wrong, but then what do I do here wrong? I don't know, whatever. If I'm just inserting a new chapter, bear with me, I was making mistakes with the Asciidoc formatting. I don't know what it is. You can see that we have a new chapter and that becomes 2 and it automatically, the counter goes on and 3 at sources is 3. Well, but we don't want that. Okay, and we also get these source codes. And then this SRC is defined above, and it just says that SRC number N is a source code listing. It's Asciidoc. And then it says that I want to have the snip from Asciidoc, which is called Asciidoc. And we can go there very easily because we need Asciidoc Where is it? It's still in the test demo. All the samples are from the test demo, which actually executes during the test. These are test files. And we are just fetching lines from this snippet. And I am taking the lines from N to N, very obviously only one line. And then from this snippet code, this is here, and then I am ending the source here. So when I say src8, then actually I'm taking the Asciidoc snippet line 8 formatted as Java source code. And every small step here, what we see here is just fetching another line as we go through with the explanation how the API works. I'm showing the source code here, which I'm just taking from there, and we go on and go on. Of course, if it changes, then we have to update the documentation. That doesn't save us for us. And also an interesting thing that what it says that this implementation, it's very specific. It's a very deep, actually digging deep very into the Java API, and it may not work for future Java versions. It may not be compatible with those. And it says that it was tested up to, but which version? Well, actually, most probably the version that I am running when I'm compiling the code. But this JVM version is defined in the source code. So if I'm looking at the JVM version, it's in the compiler. So I'm fetching a configuration parameter, as I was talking about in the examples, in the presentation I'm talking about. I'm fetching a configuration parameter, which is the JVM version and the Java version, and it says it's a snippet line, and which is a one-line snippet, so I don't need to use end snippet afterwards. And it says that JVM version, that's the name of the snippet, which is actually right now is the same as the configuration parameter, JVM version. And when I'm using it, then I'm using snip JVM version, so it's the snippet, which is the whole line, but from that I'm only interested in the part which is the number, and this is a regular expression there. So it's very easy to fetch just a parameter, a version. And if I'm look at it, then where is it? I will find it somewhere here, but it's written there that it is actually the version which it works. Yes, of course, it's in the note. So that get binary name implementation supports JVM bytecode up to 36. So it's fetched automatically from the Java code as I am editing this file. And again, here we have a snippet, which is the line 14. I hope I changed everything. No, we still have here the 13, line 13. And other changes, which I will just revert at the end. And generally, I was showing many features, not all the features, but many features that can be done. And if I'm just reverting this file with, let's say, git rollback everything I did, then everything is Mavenized here, or sorry, Jamalized, so Jamal macro extended. Everything is fetched automatically that can be fetched from the source code. Nothing is copied by hand. So if anything is changing in the source code, then it will also change here. And also, let's just set back the POM because you still see it's here. It's was changed. So let's do the rollback here as well. And it's automatically. Where is the POM file? It should be automatic. The new one. Whenever there is a caching mechanism, if the file doesn't change, then it doesn't update the right side, but if it changes, then it automatically updates everything. So let's go back to the presentation and let's wrap it up because we are slowly running out of time. We have a few more minutes, but still I don't want to be. It's better if I'm a little bit shorter than if I'm running out of time. So what is the summary and the takeaway from all this presentation? The very first thing is that documentation maintenance can be automated, partly, just like coding cannot be fully automated, luckily. So there is still need for developers, and so we have jobs. But document maintenance can also be automated. Document as a code, so using Asciidoc or some other markup, but I recommend personally Asciidoc. And using CI/CD, storing the document, the program documentation in GitHub, different versions, having review processes, very similarly as we have code reviews, is a very good thing. It's a good start, and apply CI/CD, and let's try and apply everything which is possible and use the automation if it's possible. So you should apply things like try, don't repeat yourself, solid, wherever it's possible. I mean, it's mainly a joke because I don't think that you can apply a list of substitution for a documentation, but generally the principles are the same because whenever you say that, why do I do that? Because I write code which should be maintainable. And when I'm writing documentation, then I have to, and of course the code should work. That's two different things. And sometimes these are contradict each other. And the same engineering compromise is there with the documentation, because you should write a document which is easy to maintain, but of course it should deliver the information to the reader. So it should run in the brain of the reader. And these are sometimes contradict to each other, and therefore this is the code as a document. The great idea that, well, the document is not like a conventional document, like the code is not a conventional code. When we were coding in machine code, I was doing that when I was young. I was writing in assembly, and then I had to manually convert everything using a printed table. No, it was not even printed. I had to type it with a typewriter because we didn't have printers that time. And then it was a laminated piece of paper, and there were the codes for the assembly, and I had to look at the hexacode, and then I had to write down the hexacode, and then I had to type in on the console the hexacode into the machine so that it was running the code. It was very tedious. Today we have much better tools for that. We are programming in Java, even in Rust, and then everything gets compiled. There is a JVM that runs the code. So it should run machine code, but we should make it maintainable. And the same way, document is not a conventional machine code. Machine code, in this case, the document as it looks, visible, and the reader is reading it, but we should have a source code for the document, which is then transformed into the readable, processable CPU reader, CPU processable output. So when next time you need to write some documentation, then think about this tool. And even though if it's easier to copy paste manually some information at the first, but then the next time when you have to update the document, then it's easier if you invested a little bit more. In my estimation, it's like 10 to 20 percent of the writing the document there is the extra effort that you have to invest to, instead of putting the values from the source code into the documentation, put a kind of reference, a macro, which is fetching it. And then next time you need to do anything like that, update the documentation, it will be done for you automatically. And I think for the second release, the second version, it will already pay back. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, then I'm ready to answer the questions. I'm not logged into Discord at this moment, but afterwards, after the talks, I will log in and I will have a few minutes to stay online.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm ready for the questions.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your fantastic talk. And to be honest, I don't see many questions in the chats. But what I see is that we have a comment, very grateful comment from Tardis Maya. And it says that that Jamal is the below tool for documentation as code, because it allows to generate plant UML diagrams from the textual representation. So I suppose you have sincerely yours subscribers and sincerely yours, let's say, users of the tool. So that's fantastic. So from your perspective, as you said at the very beginning, you written a couple of books already and use your tool extensively. From your perspective, roughly, how much time does it save to you?
If you are writing a whole book, then it saves a lot of time. I cannot estimate how much. And what is even more important, that it does not only save time, but it ensures that the book is consistent. So the first edition of the book, I didn't have this tool that time, was Java 9, about Java 9 with Pact. And during the editing, I did not, and the editors did not discover all the discrepancies. So I am writing the chapter, I am writing some demo code, I'm updating the demo code, I'm changing the source code, I am updating the code into the documentation, and some of the code parts were not updated. And then the code doesn't work for the reader because it's inconsistent in the book. And we had a problem with that. And when I was writing the second release of this book, second edition, in a book it's called edition, it's a second edition of the book, then I was changing for a different tool. It was still not Jamal because that time it was not mature enough, but the snippet macros were not available by that time. I was using a different Python-based tool, which was automatically copying the source into the documentation and updating the documentation. And I can guarantee that when I was typing maven clean install, then it was on the root of the project of the book. Then it was running all the test code, all the demonstration code, updating all the documentation, compiling all the documentation. So at the end, I was getting from Asciidoc Word documents, and these Word documents were containing guaranteed the snippets as they were and as they passed all the tests in the source code. And it was guaranteed to be absolutely consistent. And this is something which is beyond any value.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I can't agree more that it's a fantastic opportunity to have code and let's say in your documentation in the consistent state. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask another question. So we have a lot of markup languages for drawing diagrams, and Plant UML is, let's say, only one of them. What else we have is, for example, Mermaid. So what markup syntaxes are supported by Jamal at the moment for drawing diagrams?
Well, actually, you can support any of them. A very simple. The thing is very simple. Blunt UML, I selected Blunt UML, and I created a macro package. JAML itself does not support Blunt UML. There is a macro package, and if you put this macro package on the class path, then it's automatically recognized and taken by JAML using the service loader. Java developers know what a service loader is. And then the plant UML macro is there, which is written in Java. And this plant UML macro is just taking that, okay, the macro has an input, a part of the text, which should be plant UML formatted. And then it invokes plant UML to generate the diagram. And the return value of the macro, which gets into the text, is the reference of the SVG file which was generated. But if you have any other different, like Mermaid doesn't have a Java API because Mermaid, as far as I know, is written in JavaScript. But you can execute it as an external command. JAML by default doesn't execute just any external command because that would be absolutely insecure. You download the documentation and it sends all your money to some different account. No, but if you have installed Mermaid, you can configure how to execute Mermaid. You can, in the JAML configuration, in your user local or a global configuration file, you can create a symbolic name for this execution. And then you can write a very simple macro which says you don't need even to program it in Java. You can write it with JAML itself, define things like that. And then you just say that I want this text, which is the parameter of the save into a file. I want to execute Mermaid for this external file. It will run. I get the output of the executing things, and then I can reference the generated file. And you can insert it very easily without really programming any line of code, only writing macros. So Plant UML, and I'm not planning to integrate more things because it can be integrated using the existing tool. Plant UML was there as an example that you can do that very easily. But if you really need Mermaid, I didn't need, and you want to implement the integration, I'm ready to help you because I'm very happy if anyone is starting to use some things. And this is the problem with my open source project and probably for others as well. Many times people are using and don't give any feedback. And I don't have an idea how many people are using my tool. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I don't get any feedback because everybody is happy with it or because they just don't use it. So I'm happy to help. If you want to integrate Mermaid and you get stuck with it, you can ask. I will help.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just asking because, what I know is that diagrams which are generated by Plant UML are a little ugly. They are written yellow, but diagrams which are generated by Mermaid, they are fancy, they are shiny, and they are very colorful. Last one question from my side because we don't have any other questions anywhere. So regarding integrations, for example, may I include Jamal into my build pipeline, for example, as a plugin into Maven or Gradle builds? Just in case if I, for example,
There is a Jamal plugin version of Jamal, a Maven plugin. So you can invoke Jamal as a Maven plugin. And since Jamal is written in Java, you can just invoke it from Gradle very easily. You just have to put it on there is no specific Gradle plugin. Very simple. I never really learned Gradle to that level. And I'm more a Maven guy. And I did not write the Gradle plugin. I just wrote the Maven plugin. And you can include it. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I see Igor has joined us. So, Igor, what's your impression regarding this talk? I'm really impressed. I think that I'm struggling a lot with documentation on my current project, and I think I may try to start using it here as well. Because, we have a lot of microservices, and in every microservice, it's necessary to have, let's say, 20 lines of code how to use it in on GitHub. And in the README file, we ordinarily do is put small bit of code, just let's say add this configuration, and it will work. It would be nice to have this documentation constantly in sync with what we have in code, because we sometimes changing something and completely forget about changing the documentation, especially for newcomers.
So I guess your thoughts. I'm thinking in the same way as you. Why? For me, documentation I told before, and in previous talk when I highlighted this one, such kind of helping hand, and it continuously changes. We're changing code, we're changing, features, we're changing sometimes logic, and what a developer needs. Go to the code, go to the Confluence, spend some time, rewrite, and did he do this? Nope. Usually, it's have no time, because you need to write a test or read something new, and you don't have a time. Frankly speaking, you don't have desire to do this. Yeah, and with such kind of tools, it's easily can be solved, because as Peter highlighted, your code will be broken. You will not have a chance to commit while you fix all this. And I guess it's very, very needful such kind of tools for team leaders, for future team leaders, or for seniors who growing up and thinking about his milestones, how to do something helpful for project. Yeah. So if somebody will introduce in his project something like this, it will be very, very achievement in the future. So very, very good tool. So, Peter, you highlighted that you can help for if somebody ask about this.
Yes,
Am I right?
absolutely.
Oh, so we need to share context and colleagues who watching us. If you're thinking about creating something grateful, please take a look and contact Peter if you will have questions. From my side, I guess I will need to review and thinking about the question in my project, something like this, because it's really time saver for all of us.
I'm lucky that I have a name which is very rare, and at most of the places, my family name Verhas without any accent, because originally there is an accent on the letter A in the Hungarian, but without any accent. That's my my handle on Twitter. That's my handle on GitHub. So you can find me. And Jamal is an open source Apache 2 project. It's on GitHub. You can ask questions there, or you can find me inside EPAM if you are an EPAMer, or you can write me an email like peter@verhas.com. Very easy email address. And
I believe that somebody will contact you soon, because it should be used many of project. Okay, so our discussion can be proceed in the Discord. The links we have in the Alex, can you please copy paste link in the chat?
Yeah, I will do that in a minute. Give me a moment.
Sure. So, colleagues who are watching us, please join in Discord and ask Peter about documentation. Of course, you can discuss about these tools, about these utilities, or something different, because best practice for documentation. I saw in presentation, Peter, you highlighted use solid, use dry principles in writing of documentation.
yeah,
It's
solid
great.
is a joke kind of, because how, but you should
but
do
it's
it.
working not only for code, for documentation too. Because as for me, sometimes I'm reading documentation and see that I duplicating something here, or my colleagues, and I always talking, please put links, not use duplicate of text. You will need to explain and make changes. Why you need duplicate and on all things. So it's good patterns. So, colleagues, if you know some different patterns for documentation, share with us. It's very, very interesting. Okay, colleagues, we can move to the Discord, and I'm going to present another one speak that going happen soon on our platform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. It was
And
very
I'm joining now Discord, and I'm leaving the studio. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you later.